Hello, everybody. Welcome to Medicine and Science on the Pod TV network. I'm Nick Palavito. I'll be your moderator today. And today we're going to discuss something very important about medicine is the leadership in the medical industry, especially our government leadership. What are we going to do? What are the changes going to mean to you? And the thing is, it can be quite interesting, as I believe we're going to be moving more toward you better hold your hat and work very closely with your doctor, because what comes out of this place, Washington, D.C., may be a little bit crazy. But I'm not a medical doctor, I'm an attorney. So I'm going to turn it over to our board certified and internal medicine specialist who's been in the medical field for more than 50 years. And you've heard about him, you've seen him on the Pod TV network, none other than Dr. Michael Patmos. Dr. Patmos, this is a little bit off topic because it's not directly related to medicine. But again, it can be very important. It's leadership in the medical field. In other words, who are we listening to? And are we going to run into some problems? Should people spend more time with their medical doctors? Because what comes out of Washington, D.C. just frankly may not be in your best interest. But I'm going to turn it over to you and see what you have to say on this. I think our listeners, a very important topic.
Good morning, Nick. Good morning to all the listeners. Thank you for the opportunity. I wish I love to try to be upbeat and humorous, but I don't have too much upbeat and humorous to say today. I'm going to talk a little bit about, it's been 8 days since Trump was sworn in, and his son and his acolytes say he's accomplished more in a week than most presidents accomplish in 4 years. Yeah, he's accomplished a lot. He's managed in 8 days to create chaos, havoc, uncertainty, and panic in the public health sphere all around the world. And I'll tell you exactly why. Here's the things that Trump has done just regarding health in the last 8 days that should concern you. First of all, he imposed a gag order on all federal health agencies like the NIH, FDA, and very importantly, CDC. They are barred from communicating to the public, and they are barred from communicating to doctors. I don't know if you are aware of this, but the FDA and CDC send out almost daily, certainly weekly, pieces of information that physicians need to know in their day-to-day practice. He has now barred that. And I'll give you a granular example of how this can impact a physician like myself. 50 years ago, when I was a freshman in medical school, I remember a professor coming in and introducing us to what's called the Center for Disease Control Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. And it was at that time a little pamphlet that you would get in the mail every week, and it would tell you by state and by county what infections are happening where. And I remember this professor saying, no good doctor practices without using the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report. It is an essential tool that all physicians must use. And so I subscribed to it back then in 1977, and I have continued to read the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report every week. I check the CDC website almost daily for information about what infections are happening where. Now, this is a very rapidly moving target. Influenza can explode in Arizona one day and be in Nevada the next day. Norovirus can explode in Washington state and be in Idaho the next day. Knowing what's happening where on the ground, state by state, county by county, zip code by zip code is crucial information that physicians need to know. So that when a patient walks into your office with fever, myalgias, and prostration, if you know there's no influenza in your state, it's not influenza, it's something else. So it helps to guide your treatment and your therapy. Well, the Morbidity and Mortality Weekly Report has been silenced. CDC can no longer communicate with me. I have my hands tied behind my back, and I have to operate without the data. This is creating havoc in the public health space. That's just one example. Another thing that Trump did, other than just gag and silence CDC, is he ordered all CDC employees to immediately stop communicating with the World Health Organization. No meetings. If you're on your way to a meeting in Geneva, it's canceled. You cannot call a World Health Organization. You cannot answer a call, email, communicate with the World Health Organization in any way. That communication stream has been interrupted. Why is that bad? We have to understand how the World Health Organization and the CDC collaborate. The world is a giant petri dish, and there are pathogens that pop up everywhere all the time. When the World Health Organization identifies a hotspot for a pathogen, let's say Marburg virus in Tanzania that kills 88% of its victims, they deploy a team of World Health Organization experts and CDC experts to the location to analyze what's going on, isolate and clamp down on that thing before it spreads. This is how World Health Organization and CDC intervenes to prevent epidemics and pandemics. That's now in jeopardy. We can't communicate with World Health Organization. And Trump has withdrawn effective immediately U.S. involvement with the World Health Organization. We helped start the World Health Organization. It was the United States leadership in the 1940s that created the World Health Organization that led to the eradication of smallpox, the greatest achievement in public health in human history. Well, that's over with now, because now if you work at the CDC and you talk to someone at World Health Organization, you're going to lose your job. Another brilliant move that indicates that Trump has no understanding of basic biology. He stopped the funding and the distribution of medications for HIV around the world. And people with HIV who are depending on medications, of which the United States has funded a significant part of it, now will not be able to get their medication. And I've heard some people say, well, so what if someone in Africa has HIV? They don't know biology. Here's why this is an important and catastrophic decision. I'm incredibly stupid. When you have a virus, think of yourself as a Xerox copier. You're a photocopy machine. When you get a virus, your machinery, cellular machinery, is a Xerox copier. You're turning out billions of copies of the virus, which can spread to other people. HIV meds stop that replication process. It's like walking over to the Xerox copier and unplugging it or hitting the off button. The Xerox copier is no longer working. The person is no longer making copies of virus. When you take away the medication, guess what happens? You just turn the Xerox copier back on. You just plugged it into the wall. Now those people, those millions of people around the world whose HIV is capped, they will start replicating HIV virus. Now, HIV virus isn't the easiest one to spread. It's not spread in an aerosol. It is spread by person-to-person contact. And I think, if my memory serves me, I think people still have sex. So what's happening, what will happen is that these people with HIV are now going to become active replicators of HIV, and that will lead to spread of HIV person to person around the world, and eventually, people do fly to the United States. It's going to cause more HIV in the United States. So it's just basic biology he doesn't understand. The next thing that Trump did that was chaotic and incredibly stupid is he paused research. I don't know if you know this, but he paused NIH research. NIH funds most research in the United States and around the world. It's on pause. Researchers now have to stop their studies. Patients who are maybe enrolled in clinical trials as last-ditch efforts for their cancer, their studies have been stopped. Their medications are stopped. The collection of data is stopped. The funding has stopped. Imagine that you're a researcher. You spent years preparing to do a major randomized controlled trial, multi-institutional placebo-controlled trial of a medication or a therapy. And Trump comes on and says, nope, pause, hit the pause button. That research is stopped. He has put a stop to all research, for NIH-funded research. That's cancer research. That's research in all sorts of things. Done. It's stopped. He has directed the Centers for Medicaid and Medicare to stop issuing payments. Now, he quickly backtracked and says, oh, it was a glitch with the computer. So Medicaid payments are turned back on. But CMS right now, the entity that runs Medicare and Medicaid, is essentially in a pause mode right now, waiting to see, what they're going to do next when his new director of CMS, who knows nothing about CMS, takes over. Finally, and most topically for today, is his appointment of Robert F. Kennedy Jr. as Secretary of Health and Human Services. Why is this disastrous? Well, we know that Kennedy is he founded the Children's Health Defense. Children's Health Defense is the world's leading organization that promotes anti-vax rate. He's responsible for reducing vaccination rates, not just in the United States, but all over the world. And that in turn is leading to a resurgence of infectious contagious diseases. Just yesterday, Robert Kennedy's cousin, Caroline Kennedy, you may remember her. She was John F. Kennedy's daughter. She, and along with John Jr., stood on the street corner that day in 1963 and waved goodbye to Daddy as the motorcade with the casket went by. That Caroline Kennedy just yesterday wrote a 2-page letter to the Senate, which I have posted on my LinkedIn profile, which everyone needs to read, which is a devastating criticism of her cousin. They grew up together. She knows him better than anybody. She referred to him as a predator. She described him as not being mentally right. And very importantly, she said what he's up to is combing through records to try to find something he can sue over so he can make some money, because that's what Children's Health Defense does. They not only discourage vaccination, but they're a litigation engine looking to capitalize on anything they can find. So between he and Aaron Siri, they're going to go through government. That's why they said, don't destroy any records, keep all your emails. They're looking for stuff they can sue over so they can make a buck. Just today, just shortly, a few minutes ago, I was watching when Robert Kennedy, in response to a question, uttered completely incorrect information. He just said, this is why he should not be Secretary of Health and Human Services. He just said an hour ago that children 6 years of age have zero risk of COVID. Let me say that again. Kennedy said, quote, this morning, children, for example, 6 years of age, have zero risk of COVID. That is demonstrably, patently false. Nearly 2,000 children in that age range are dead from COVID in the United States. Thousands more have been left permanently damaged with multi-system inflammatory disease. And I personally, one of my other roles is I work as a consultant to a management services organization in California where I approve and deny prior authorization requests. I personally have approved 2 prior authorization requests for complete lung transplants in children who had COVID. These were young children whose lungs were destroyed by COVID, who needed complete bilateral lung transplantation. That is a very big deal. I approved 2 of those. So don't tell me that children have zero risk of COVID. Where did Kennedy get that wrong information from? He's not a doctor. He doesn't work in a clinical setting. He doesn't work in a hospital. He has no clinical training. No, he can't know that. He has to be repeating what he has heard from someone else. Where did that all come from? Who was the first person to get up there publicly and say that children should not be vaccinated against COVID? It was Robert Malone. That was what he said when he came to Maui in 2022. He said children should not have no risk of COVID, so they shouldn't be vaccinated. What is repeating misinformation. So we talk about misinformation. We say it's a problem for the public. It's not just a problem for the public. What happens when our leaders, like the President of the United States, the Secretary of Health and Human Services, and all of those appointees at CMS and NIH and CDC are filled with misinformation? The misinformation issue isn't just one for consumers. It's our leaders are full of misinformation, and they don't even realize they're misinformed. Well, anyhow, that's my unhappy. What's going to happen with this is, barring some miracle, what we will see is a significant resurgence in contagious infectious diseases. They're going to increase as vaccination rates decrease. Chronic disease appeared because people live longer because of vaccination and antibiotics. Now people live to be in their 70s and 80s, and they live long enough to have their DNA sabotage themselves with the chronic disease. Chronic disease is no mystery. Most of it is age-related, and it's due to genetic genes that are we're actually predisposed to self-destruct as we get old. Anyhow, that is my presentation for today. Let's have a little conversation.
Yeah, I just have a couple comments where I'm bringing our panel, but the thing is, I was thinking about the influence that this place, Washington, D.C., has on the medical profession, and it's way too much, Dr. Patmos, because especially we're seeing it right now where people are totally unqualified, uneducated, bring in. Now, I'll tell you what they did with the Federal Reserve. The Federal Reserve, they isolated the group so they could not basically be influenced by the whims of the politicians. And of course, they did that with the court system as well, as many of the judges are appointed for life and they're not subject to the ability for the whims of politicians. Perhaps what we need to do on a going forward basis is to isolate the medical profession away from politics, because what we're seeing right now is potentially extremely destructive, where a politician with an agenda, or a series of politicians who have no background whatsoever, become purported leaders of an area that they don't understand. By the way, the Pod TV LinkedIn poll, which has been pretty accurate, even predicting Trump's win and also Peter's Hegseth, whatever his name is, to be confirmed by a very most thin margin, has Robert Kennedy being confirmed as the Secretary of Health and Human Services. So I would not be surprised he will be confirmed. But I think the real problem that I'm looking at is we need some strong non-governmental organizations that can't be influenced, similar to the Federal Reserve. Otherwise, this thing could happen over and over again, and there's very little you can do about it. Yeah, Mark.
I got a quick question about leadership, and it actually comes down to an interesting article that I read and everything along those lines, because even when it comes to leadership, there's a group of folks that are very much involved in leadership, and it's our future folks in the college world and everything like that. So I was wondering, Dr. Patmos' thoughts around this, because one of the things that I had read, which I found very interesting, was that, and I knew this for a fact, probably because I watch enough sports and everything, that 91% of our athletes are injured and everything. So if you're going to that athleticism, you're probably going to have a good chance of being injured. And they're saying that a lot of times these injuries, they don't have any sort of care after they get out of the athletic field. So I'm wondering if some of these lack of communications, even from the government, are going to impact that as well, because I know a lot of trainers and others are regulated supposedly by the government. But is this going to impact our college athletes? Because when I read that figure, I'm going like, yeah, I know, because I've lived near Duke, and I know that a lot of people, whether soccer, volleyball, or our basketball players, are injured. But 91%, that's a lot of folks.
Yeah, athletic injuries are a big problem. There's a lot of doctors who are involved with that: orthopedic doctors, physiatrists, family medicine, sports medicine doctors, all deal with those kinds of injuries. And injuries are subject to and part of clinical research. And research being paused, I mean, what's the latest treatment for this injury or that injury? Right now, in many sports, one of the big concerns is chronic traumatic encephalopathy, brain injury. In football, for example, boxing, mixed martial arts. There's a lot of research in those areas that needs to be done. And all that research, I gather, has been stopped.
Well,
so right now we are in the middle of the annual COVID spike. And the last time that the CDC updated its COVID tracking was 18 days ago. And they've said that maybe they'll get. Somebody has said that maybe in February they'll do an update, but maybe not. But if you're trying to make decisions about whether to get vaxxed again, whether to keep masking, your information is stopped. There's also RSV. Also in Kansas City, they had one of the largest, is in the middle of one of the largest tuberculosis outbreaks in U.S. history. And yeah, RFK Jr. will get confirmed. I've been looking at the comments on Twitter from his supporters. And if you look at their qualifications, these are thoughtful, do your own research people who've come to their own conclusions and unfortunately have reached a bunch of shitty conclusions doing their own research. They might be qualified in their fields, but then they go to the wrong sources and get filled with crap.
Exactly correct. I think in terms of when people are being a little naive in the public health world, they're like, well, there's a pause, and when will the communications come back? They're not going to come back the way we knew them. I think my prediction is when the communications are allowed to resume, they will be screened, rewritten, edited, and whitewashed to whatever they say has to make Trump look good. It cannot be anything that puts Trump in a bad light. So I think what we're seeing is a takeover of communication into and transitioning it into a propaganda machine.
Just really quickly, because he brought up something Rick did, and I was under the impression that had almost been eradicated and everything. So are we going to see some other eradicated diseases? Because when he brought up tuberculosis, I remember even my grandmother and grandparents talking about tuberculosis, and I thought that we had pretty much gotten rid of that disease and everything.
Tuberculosis was back in the 20s and 30s. Everybody was exposed to tuberculosis. We had TB sanitariums in every town. Most hospitals today had their roots as TB sanitariums 120 years ago. Tuberculosis was ubiquitous prior to the development of antibiotics against TB, and over time, because of those antibiotics, isoniazid and others, we managed to nearly completely eradicate tuberculosis in the United States. It's still in other parts of the world, and now we have some drug-resistant TB. But what's happening now is we have the largest TB outbreak in Kansas, and why now? And it's probably because people are not going to the doctor, not listening to the doctor, not having tests, not having screens. Doctors haven't seen TB. I'm young. I'm old enough to remember TB. A lot of younger doctors have never seen a case of TB, don't know how to manage it. And very importantly, what do you do if a patient refuses treatment? I have medical freedom. I'm not going to take that drug. What do you do if a person has TB or latent TB and refuses treatment? There are laws about what we can do, but I don't think we'll no longer be able to do that. So I'm looking for a broad increase. I expect a broad increase in a host of contagious infectious diseases over the next several years, including tuberculosis.
Trump set us up for COVID too. Now maybe
Yes.
We used to have like a CSI team called the Global Pandemic or Global Health Response Unit, and Trump and John Bolton disbanded that, scattered its members to the wind in 2018, 2 years before COVID. If they'd been in place, maybe they could have gotten on top of it a little bit more effectively.
There's no question that Trump's actions are directly responsible for how bad COVID was in the United States. He knew that. And that's why in March of 2020, he retained the PR firm of O'Donnell and Associates to give him a book of talking points. And they came up with what's called the Corona Big Book of Talking Points, which was prepared for Trump and was distributed to all GOP members of Congress and all the Trump right-leaning media outlet, which is a series of talking points about COVID, all designed to shift blame away from Trump onto China and onto the federal government and onto Anthony Fauci. This is all just a shift thing. He knew he had no idea what to do, but he knew he didn't want to hurt the economy because he wanted to hurt his chances of getting reelected. So he contracted with O'Donnell and Associates to produce the Corona Big Book. Look it up. It's right on Google. All the talking points are there. Fauci, lab leak. They invented that whole narrative was a creation of a political PR firm. And all those talking points went to the Republicans, and they just repeat them point by point, bullet by bullet.
Yeah. I think this leads us to where we're going to have to ultimately do like we did with the Federal Reserve that runs our monetary system. The Vice President, Doug Tillett from the Federal Reserve, has been on our shows before. As a matter of fact, we did a 5-part series with them. When I met with them, I found the people of the Federal Reserve to be extremely intelligent, very thoughtful, did a lot of research. Frankly, they're bloody good, but they're also very independent, which keeps the politicians away from them. Ultimately, if the health system in the United States is to survive, it needs to break itself away from politicians, create a situation like the Federal Reserve so a executive can't come in and tamper with the structures that have been set up for decades that run our health system in the United States. It's like saying we're going to allow the executive branch to turn off the internet tomorrow.
Exactly. That's exactly right. We have physicians have to be able, scientists and physicians have to be able to do their work for the good of the public without being under the thumb of the flavor of the day of whatever political tyrant happens to be in charge today.
Right. Yeah. So this might be a wake-up call, and hopefully something good will come out of it as the American public, once they find out how bad it can really be, turns and are more educated in this area to realize that having like we have an independent judiciary. By the way, the independent judiciary upheld cases allowing these vaccines to take place, but we have worked very hard in the legal profession to be independent from the executive branch. Well, we need to have the scientific educational branch or the health branch to be also independent, so you don't run into this. When I saw this, I was going, you cannot be serious. When did the executive branch have the right to go tinker with our healthcare system? But yeah, Rick, you have a comment.
So each of you, Michael and Nick, you could each write a book that would sell quite a few copies. Michael, you could sell How to Protect Your Health Under Trump's Second Administration. And Nick, How to Get the Heck Out of the United States. My wife is like, she reads a website called Expatsy, or a chat room where it's expats trading tips. And I'm like, well, the boss of this network, he went to Spain. He's like, well, she's like, talk to Nick. You should write down how you did what you did.
Yeah, the life expectancy in Spain is like 84. The life expectancy in the United States is like 77. And one thing they do here, which is quite interesting, they don't do over there, if your BMI is too high, your cardiologist continually beats you up until you get your whole systems correct. They work very hard on making sure each individual in Spain is very healthy. It's just a whole different way of life and a whole different system. But what I've seen in the United States since I'm over here and watched the political winds come, and I'm glad Dr. Patton does this show and sends this out to everybody to see what the problems are when politicians, the worst group of people in America, are controlling your health and not the medical doctors anymore. This is more serious than the insurance companies controlling your health system. I mean, it's bad enough that the people complain about, if we have the government control our health system, that there's going to be these death things, et cetera. Well, right now, as we just saw, the government does control the health system, and that needs to change. They should have no right to jump into the CDC, the NIH, or the WHO. It's none of their bloody business. Like the Federal Reserve said, hey, look, how we handle monetary policy has nothing to do with the federal government.
We're winding down and everything, but really quickly, Dr. Patmos, because when I was growing up in the 80s and, college in the 80s, early 80s, but high school in the 70s and everything, I remember there being a lot of conversation about health education and all in that space, whether it was the foods that you're supposed to eat, the dietary requirements, and all along those lines. So to Nick's point about what he's learning in Spain, how much of that are we seeing in the schools? I mean, I guess I could ask my nephews and everything, because I do have 2 nephews and everything, but I'm thinking that they're not learning as much about health as they probably should be in the school system. So I just wanted your take on that as a bird certified
That's not been my experience. My experience since, I I graduated high school in 1970. I remember in high school and grade school learning about healthy diet and fruits and vegetables and all that stuff. Throughout my medical training, physicians and the medical profession has always been about healthy diet and weight loss and don't smoke and drink, I used to give talks 50 years ago about how to live to be 100. And the primary thing was don't smoke, don't drink, get vaccines, and eat healthy. I mean, I think we've been talking about this forever. I don't know where the idea came from. Well, I know where it came. It came from misinformation that somehow the medical profession is blind to healthy living, that we're opposed to exercise and diet. That's not been my experience in the half a century that I've been in this profession.
Yeah, and with that, we're going to have to continue next week. We do want to thank Dr. Michael Patmos, board certified in internal medicine, by bringing us updates on what's going on in the medical world throughout just not only the United States, but throughout the world. We'll see you next week. Bye.
See you next week.